Beliefs increase possibilities. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, fellow students of life. It's been 50 years since I've sat where you are. If there is one thing I have learned repeatedly in the past half-century, it is to set goals. The kind of goals you set is obviously up to you. But set them. And work hard to achieve them, harder. Harder. Goals matter. There's undoubtedly more to learn, but I can't imagine at what cost. The last few decades have taught me about the work involved in goal setting and achieving. Different people in different situations set different kinds of goals. The type of goals you set doesn't matter. What matters is that every goal that we reach brings us closer to being the person we want to be.
That was Hal. Let me introduce you to him more thoroughly. He truly understands the power of setting goals. Today, he'll share with you as a survivor who has lived through the necessity, power, and undeniable efficacy of goal setting. His journey is one of resilience, determination, and an unshakable belief that goals bring progress, no matter how small the steps. This aspect of Hal's story begins with his first rehabilitation journey after a motorcycle crash left him hemiplegic, paralyzed on his left side. As a teenager, he faced an uphill battle that required him to rebuild his life, one step, one movement, one hard-fought inch at a time. Back then, the goals started small, holding on to something and going from sitting to standing, flexing a muscle, taking a step. He learned that each small achievement was not insignificant but a stepping stone. Every success, no matter how minor it seemed, fueled the next. When frustration threatened to pull him under, he leaned on one undeniable truth: progress comes from persistence. In other words, a winners don't quit attitude spurred him on. Fast forward almost 4 decades, after a stroke, Hal's winners don't quit attitude again inspires his ability to set goals that work on increasing his body's ability to move more than expected. He faced the reality of rebuilding, again. But this time, he had experience. He knew the process. He didn't have the same youthful energy that carried him forward before, so he knew that relying on goals carried power. Moving his wrist, standing for a few seconds, walking down a hallway, each step mattered. The mindset he cultivated years before became his greatest asset. Through both recoveries, Hal learned that setting goals isn't just about achievement but hope. It's about proving to yourself that you can. Today, he is here to present those findings to you. Please welcome Hal.
Greetings, students. It's been 50 years since I've sat where you are. If there is one thing I have learned repeatedly in the past half a century, it is to set goals. The kind of goals you set is obviously up to you. But set them. And work hard toward them, harder. Harder. Goals matter. Different people in different situations set different kinds of goals. The specific type of goals you set doesn't matter that much. What actually matters is that every goal we reach brings us closer to being the person we want to be. Have you ever set major, life-changing goals? What's the best thing about high, difficult-to-reach goals? The toughest goal I ever set and reached was accepting the limits put on me by my motorcycle crash. Part of accepting these new limits was about discovering and focusing on what was still possible. At first, the sheer weight of therapy and new limitations felt overwhelming. It was easy to focus on what I'd lost. Looking back, I can see how it took me longer than it had to, but I can also see that once I gradually learned to accept that my condition was permanent, everything changed. Instead of making excuses, I looked for solutions. I stopped seeing my disability as a barrier. I started believing in what was still possible. That shift made all the difference. Hope replaced frustration. I focused on what I could do, not what I couldn't do. Believing in possibilities gave me the energy to move forward with a better attitude and a more substantial purpose. Sharing this idea with people near the beginning of the road I'd been on for decades gave me the power to impact lives positively. The opportunity to share the wisdom I'd gained by recovering from my mistakes almost justified my earlier mistakes. Instead of debating or even thinking about whether the end justifies the means, let's consider one of my highest goals. Becoming a well-paid public speaker was one of my proudest and most fulfilling goals. Standing on stage, sharing my ABC goal-seeking strategies, accepting the life book you've been given, believing you can write a happy ending, and caring about others, was more than just a job. It was a calling. I didn't just speak to entertain, I spoke to empower. And my audiences weren't just listeners, they were fighters, survivors, and goal-setters who, in many ways, embodied the essence of perseverance better than anyone else. I've spoken to many different groups over the years. Most have had nothing to do with disabilities, but on those that have, I have found that the eastern states hold a deep respect for the disability community, a respect I rarely saw back home in the West. Their attitudes, reflected in individuals, companies, and organizations, were not just about compliance with accessibility laws, they were about opportunity. Eastern states didn't see people with disabilities as burdens. They see them as goal-oriented individuals who have already conquered more challenges than most people ever would. I'll never forget one particular event, one that stood out for many reasons. I had been hired to deliver my ABC keynote to several hundred people with disabilities, their families, and their caregivers. Unlike the usual events where attendees were mostly professionals or advocates, this audience consisted mainly of those living with disabilities themselves. Some had come independently, while others were bussed in from various live-in facilities designed to help them build independent lives. From the moment I arrived, I could tell this event was different. Usually, I'd be picked up by an event planner or an assistant. This time, a fully dressed chauffeur met me at the airport, standing by a full-sized limousine. At first, I thought he'd confused me with someone else, maybe a politician or a CEO, but no, they were there for me. I had come to expect that level of respect in the East, not just because I was a speaker but because of who my audience was. In Eastern states, people with disabilities were treated with at least the same respect due to their office or position. Treating them with more could seem like pity, treating them with less would border on disrespect. This wasn't just about accessibility, it was about dignity. As always, after my keynote, a handful of audience members stuck around to talk. Some wanted to share their stories, others just wanted to say thank you. But one young woman caught my attention. She had been sitting near the front, nodding with my words, absorbing every concept like she was filing it away for later use. As the room thinned out, she approached me with a question.
I had a brain injury 2 years ago, and at first, all I wanted was to get back to who I used to be. But now, I don't even know if that's possible. I feel stuck between wanting to hold on to my old goals and realizing I might need new ones. How do you even begin to figure out what's next when your whole identity feels like it got rewritten?
Her words hit hard. I knew exactly what she was talking about. It's one thing to lose abilities, but losing the sense of who you are. That's a different kind of challenge altogether. I hear you. And you're right, it's one of the toughest parts. After my motorcycle crash, I thought my life was over. But I learned, what I had to learn, that we don't get to be the same person forever. Nobody does, not even those without injuries. The difference is that we got pushed into change a little faster and a little harder than most. And yeah, that's unfair. But that doesn't mean we don't still get a say in what comes next. The trick is in your question. You said you feel stuck between old and new goals. That means you're already thinking about what's next. That's good. That's progress. My advice? Don't chase your old self like she's someone you can get back to. Instead, get curious about who you are now. What do you care about today? What excites you, even just a little? Start there. Let those small sparks lead the way to bigger goals. You're not starting over. You're continuing with new experience, wisdom, and strength. She nodded, and I saw a flicker of something in her eyes for the first time that evening. Not just understanding, but hope. That's why I do what I do. Not to tell people what they should want, but to remind them that they still get to want things. They still get to set goals, dream, and build a future that matters, no matter their past. And if they can believe that, they feel hopeful enough to start writing their happy endings. The joy I feel helping people find their hope is why I love what I do. Have you ever been in a place of fear you felt desperate to get out of, but you didn't know how to leave? I sure have. Maybe listening to how I escaped my fear trap will give you ideas how you can escape your own trap. Coming out of my coma happened very slowly. My motorcycle crash occurred on May 7th, but it wasn't until sometime in late July that I'd woken up enough from my month-long coma to notice that I was hemiplegic. I couldn't move half my body, and I couldn't talk. My long-term memory was in place. I could point out letters on an alphabet board they set me up to communicate with. My head injury ruptured my hypothalamus gland. These glands control the severity of our emotional reactions. The first time I remember having an emotionally over-the-top reaction was when Harborview Hospital's chief neurosurgeon finally responded to my repeated request to come to my room. It surprised me when he came walking in. Without thinking, I tried talking with him, which only created confusion. It took us a while, but he finally understood my question: how long will it be before I can get up and get going? The surgeon looked into my face as he told me I would never be able to walk without assistance, talk understandably, or drive legally. The words hit me with a force of despair and hopelessness. I was at the prime of my life, but what he said made it sound like prime time was over. The surgeon's words meant no more skiing or motorcycle riding. And no more blending in on the beach or with other concertgoers. Fear of being plucked out of a culture I loved and thrust into a culture of limitations was more than I could take on without showing severe wear and tear. Even with my severely slowed thought processes, the wear and tear only took about 10 seconds to build up and hit me with the suddenness of a pin pricking a fully inflated balloon. No! I yelled in panic. How could I accept going from a physically athletic person who was as quick-thinking as most people to a cripple who had nothing going his way? Frantically, I threw the sheet and bedspread off me. With my still strong right leg, I pushed my newly paralyzed left leg off the bed. I hung my right leg over the side of the bed beside my left. The bed was high enough to keep my feet several inches off the floor. Without pausing, I slid quickly off the bed. I should have stood still a second, stabilizing myself before taking my still working right hand off the bed. But I didn't. I just charged forward. My left leg wouldn't follow my right, and down I went. 2 nurses appeared in my room and helped the surgeon put me back in bed. I felt helpless. I couldn't leave things there. As soon as they turned from the bed, I climbed back out and fell on my face again. This time, they put me back and strapped me in. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, feeling hopeless and powerless. The story ahead outlines definable steps and mindsets in my rehab journey that started when I believed myself powerless to make any meaningful changes and brought me to a place where I feel capable of making incredibly significant changes. This should be interesting to my fellow rehabbers who experience occasional feelings of hopelessness because the steps are duplicatable by me, by any of my fellow rehabbers, or by any of my fellow goal strivers.
Hello world, meet Hal. Hal believes life becomes more manageable and fulfilling when he has a goal to work toward. He's experienced the crushing weight of stagnation twice in his life, once after the motorcycle crash that left him hemiplegic and again following his hemorrhagic stroke. Those periods, when progress felt impossible, shaped his understanding of himself. To Hal, goals aren't just aspirations, they're lifelines. He often says they're as vital to his spirit as oxygen is to his lungs. It's this deep connection to purpose that drives him, even when the odds are stacked against him. Once they are understood, goals can serve as energizing lifelines for anybody. Rehab and life are both best when they are win-win. An important aspect of believing in possibilities is that just because there's a winner doesn't mean there has to be a loser. Neither rehab nor life are us versus them situations. The best winning happens when everybody wins. believing in possibilities is a helpful mindset in rehab or when facing any daunting situation. Hal's right hand gripped the circular bar going around the outside circumference of his wheelchair's right wheel. His hand pushed then pulled in a smooth, circular motion, propelling his body with a rhythm he was learning to rely on. His right arm and right leg, two parts of his body that still listened to him without question, guided and propelled him. As he rolled past the nurse's desk, the familiar sounds of the hospital buzzed around him, distant conversations, the soft beeping of monitors, the hum of fluorescent lights. Still, he focused only on the path ahead. A strong companion on many motorcycle adventures, his right leg now served as a rudder to steer the wheelchair. His motions were careful and practiced. He knew the hallway well, from the elevators by the nurse's desk to the ones at the wing's end, near the physical therapy room, and from that end to the patient rooms lining the hallway nearest the opposite end of the nurse's desk. This was his track, traveling it was his new way of feeling alive. He glanced at the elevators as he passed them, his mind occupied by thoughts of Cheryl. She was coming today like she did every day. The anticipation tugged at him, driving him to keep moving. She had been his co-pilot on so many rides before. The memory of those days, with the wind rushing past them and the open road stretching out ahead, made him ache with a sweet and painful longing, but he was also grateful Cheryl hadn't been with him on that last fateful ride. The one that ended everything as he knew it. The thought was a strange mix of relief and sorrow. The elevator doors opened. Hal's heart skipped a beat. Cheryl had been the prettiest girl in school. Her typical attire, dresses, meant she almost always looked professional. Today, her sky blue dress seemed perfect for a sunny summer day. She stepped out of the elevator and glanced around, her eyes immediately finding him. A smile spread across her face, the kind that reached her eyes and warmed Cal to his core. Hal's hand stilled on the wheel as he took her in, a beacon of comfort and hope in this new, challenging life. She moved toward him, her presence washing over him like a soothing, comforting balm. Hal's parents had been his anchor through the turbulence of the last several weeks, their support steady and unwavering. They had been there through the surgeries, the slow waking from his 31-day coma, getting set up in his various therapies, and the countless days when everything felt like too much. They were his foundation, the ones who kept him grounded. But Cheryl represented something different, something he couldn't let go of. She was a link to his life before, the life of freedom, adventure, and possibilities. Seeing her, knowing she was still with him, gave him a reason to keep fighting, to keep moving forward, wheelchair or not. Hal lifted his hand from the wheel and held it out to her as she reached him. Cheryl took it without hesitation, her touch grounding him in the moment. She bent and gently kissed him.
Hey you. I've been missing you. How are you feeling today?
I'm glad you are here. You make it so much easier to feel happy.
Hal tried to change his thoughts. Sometimes, he couldn't help but think about how bad things could have been. Cheryl had ridden on the back of his bike plenty of times, her arms wrapped around him as they rode down the freeway or on the winding, wooded roads up to Snoqualmie Falls. They loved those rides, loved the freedom of the open road. But she hadn't been with him on that final ride, and Hal was eternally grateful. The thought of her being hurt or worse was unbearable. Hal's family had been a stabilizing rock for him, standing by him through every surgery and every early therapy session. Knowing they were there was a comfort that gave him strength when he needed it most. His dad would walk up from his downtown office and eat lunch with him. He and Hal's mom believed in him when he couldn't believe in himself. Cheryl played a special role. She represented the future, the life he desperately wanted to reclaim. Now, Cheryl quietly waited a few minutes while she and Hal held themselves together, appreciating each other. She finally broke the silence.
Okay, big guy. Are you ready for our walk?
Hal nodded and pushed his foot into the floor with practiced pressure. His wheelchair did a 180 so he faced down the hall leading to the PT room. Hal motored himself toward the empty on weekends PT room using his right foot in hand. Cheryl walked beside him. The PT doors were closed but opened easily as she turned the knob. Hal immediately rolled toward a set of parallel bars, positioning his chair at one end so that he would face between them and look down their length. He grabbed the bar on his right and began readying himself to stand.
You've got this.
Cheryl's ordinarily gentle voice seemed firm and confident. She could see the strain in his face, the intensity of his focus. She also saw the fire in his eyes, his refusal to let this injury define him. She had always known Hal was strong, but this was a new level of strength from deep within, from a place of pure guts and willpower.
You're doing amazing.
She continued, moving alongside him as he progressed along the bar.
Step by step, you're doing it. I knew you would.
How could he stop now? He couldn't. Not with Cheryl cheering him on, as she was. He didn't have a choice now. He had to make it back to his chair. Hal's breath came in short gasps, but he kept moving. He didn't look but could feel Cheryl's presence beside him. Her words were a steady stream of encouragement that kept him going. He felt strong enough to make it for the first time in a long while. And with Cheryl by his side, he felt inspired to keep pushing and fighting. His therapist would have had him sit back in his chair, but no therapists were in sight, not this time. Hal gritted his teeth, summoning every ounce of strength he had left. 10 more feet, such a short distance. If only his balance were better. Balancing himself was the hardest part. He renewed his grip on the bar, carefully spun himself around, and slowly allowed himself to sit back into the wheelchair. Cheryl knelt beside him, her hand resting on his.
You were incredible, Hal. I'm so proud of you.
Hal looked at her, his exhaustion evident, but so was his determination and the relief he felt that she shared this with him.
This is just the beginning.
He warned. Cheryl squeezed his hand, her heart full.
And I'll be right here with you every step of the way.
The most important ingredients of a successful rehab are belief and teamwork. Belief and teamwork are the foundation of recovery. Every great transformation begins in the mind. How people see themselves, their potential, limitations, and ability to overcome shapes their reality. On the road to recovery, belief is the first step, not just in the possibility of progress but in the ability to make it happen. Yet belief alone is never enough. Actual progress requires teamwork, people who stand beside the survivors, challenge them and lift them when they cannot lift themselves. This section explores the power of belief and the essential role of teamwork in turning struggle into strength, despair into determination, and setbacks into stepping stones.
About 4 months into my 4.5-month stay at Harborview Hospital, the rehab floor's advanced patients were allowed to attend a Mariners baseball game. In the days leading up to it, I felt excitement and nervousness. I kept discussing the game with Cheryl, asking her to double-check the details even though nothing had changed. We'd been off the Harborview grounds before for swimming in an overheated pool, but that had been in a controlled environment. This would be the real world. The large Harborview van took us rehabbers right up to the Kingdome. It stopped at an angle that protected us from the approaching sea of baseball fans while we assembled our wheelchairs and other assistive devices.
Are you ready for this?
As I'll ever be, I said, bracing my good foot against the ground. We started slow, her pushing and me pulling on the rail with my good hand. The incline wasn't steep but stretched forever, turning at every level. Halfway up the first ramp, my arm burned. But straining my muscles like I used to do in the gym felt too good to complain.
You okay, Hal? How are you doing?
I'm doing great. This is just what the doctor ordered. I'm really digging this.
One push at a time. We've got this.
I dug in again, gripping the railing, pulling with every ounce of strength I had left. Cheryl matched my effort, never complaining, never letting up. Sweat dampened my shirt, but the cheers from inside kept us moving. At the next turn, she leaned in.
You're doing great. Just a little more.
Easy for you to say. She laughed.
You want me to call for backup?
Not a chance. This is fun. The last stretch felt endless, but when we finally reached the top, I let out a breathless laugh. We made it. Cheryl clapped my shoulder.
Told you we would.
Inside, the ballpark roared to life. We found our seats, exhausted but victorious.
You earned that hot dog.
She said, opening a box of Cracker Jacks. I grinned around a mouthful of hearty beef hot dog. You aren't kidding. We both earned that and more. The ball game is one example of the power and the value of goals, but those were short-term goals. Real productive rehab journeys and lives include all kinds of goals. Both short-term and long-term goals are absolutely essential to get the most out of our efforts. There was a time when I thought goals were just checkboxes on a long, miserable list of things I'd never get to cross off. That kind of thinking will wear you out fast. But over time, I learned something surprising. Setting goals, real ones that push the limits of what I think I can do, isn't just about achieving them. It's about the energy they give me, the fire that keeps me moving forward. The first and most challenging goal I ever set for myself was to accept my disability. Not just acknowledge it, accept it. That's a different thing altogether. Acknowledging is passive, a nod to reality. Acceptance is active. It's the choice to carry the weight of what is instead of being crushed beneath it. Resenting my disability was easy. Too easy. And it didn't get me anywhere except stuck in my frustration. But accepting it? That gave me room to breathe. It didn't happen overnight. Some days, I still had to remind myself, but reaching that goal made everything possible. Once I accepted my disability, I realized something else. Believing in my possibilities became easier. My legs didn't work the way they used to. My left side had a mind of its own. Fine. But what could I do? I could still push forward. I could still work toward something. I could still live a life that meant something to me. And that realization gave me confidence, a kind I'd never had before. Not the confidence of someone who assumes things will work out, but the kind that comes from knowing you can keep going when they don't. Goals, I found, are powerful motivators, whether you reach them or not. If you reach all your goals are too low. The best goals stretch you past what you thought you could do, past what anyone else thought you could do. I've failed plenty of times, but every time I set a goal, I felt stronger just for having something to aim for. That's why I keep setting them. My next goal is simple but important: getting to my outpatient rehab appointment at Harborview. It's not just about showing up. It's about proving to myself that I'm still moving forward. That I still have things to work on, challenges to take on, and progress to make. The old me might have seen that appointment as just another obligation. The me who has accepted his reality sees it for what it really is, a step forward. Accepting my disability was the most challenging goal I ever set, but it made every goal that followed possible. And as long as I keep setting them, I know I'll keep going. That's the real victory. This rehab experience shows the importance of not assuming. Assumptions can be frighteningly limiting or dangerously optimistic. One day, I had a routine outpatient rehab check-in. I parked in Harborview Hospital's parking garage, removed my cane, and began the long trudge to the outpatient rehab clinic. Being able to handle the beginning of my second rehab journey, my stroke rehab, with calm confidence, was learned during a 4-decades-long process. These chronicles aim to share my key learning moments with you, my fellow rehabber. In this chronicle, please notice how helpful it is to avoid making assumptions. That may sound overly simplified, but building an encouraging, renewable supply of confidence and hope, as outlined in these chronicles, starts with and continues to depend on the simple rule of not making assumptions. A few years after my original hospital stay, in 1980, I'm doing a routine visit to the rehab clinic. Reaching the clinic door, I stand straighter, taller, like physical therapists would have reminded me, instead of leaning so heavily on my cane. After pulling the door open and surveying the clinic situation a few seconds, I hobble into the crowded outpatient waiting room. Wheelchairs, walkers, and canes clutter the floor. Impaired speech fills the air. I smile, somewhat regretfully. Like it or not, these are my people. In my experience, things go best for me, and I imagine other rehabbers as well, when we understand that how we feel about ourselves and our circumstances has a definite effect on how people feel about us. Limping into the clinic, I feel good about my disabilities. The same positive feelings don't touch me when I enter other places. Here I fit in. Unfortunately, I fit into the disability community very well. Becoming okay with a membership in this community requires an attitude shift. I limp further into the clinic toward an empty chair beside a suntanned girl wearing faded jeans and a tie-dye t-shirt. A walker stands beside her chair. She looks mad and bored as she fiercely chews her gum. I sit beside her and ask, "What's up?" She pops a bubble before turning her head to look at me.
If you're talking to me, talk slower so I hear you right.
I like how simple and respectful she talks. Carefully I say, "What's going on?"
I don't know. All I know is I've been sitting here for almost 2 hours.
Wow. They're usually slow and late, but not like this. I wonder what happened.
All I know is I hate the way disabled people are treated. SPIUS SEC equals 0.6 a pause. It's like they forget we're even here.
In a more relaxed setting, I would have explained that some people have disabilities. But there are no disabled people. A disabled person would be someone who isn't 100% a person. As it was, my temptation to explain this was cut short. Just like her complaint had been overheard, a nurse opens the waiting room door and almost timidly calls,
Grace.
"The attitude queen I've been talking with is named Grace." How ironic, I'm thinking, as the angry girl grabs her walker and slowly, carefully gets to her feet. I smile back as she looks at me with a smile and a nod before heading off. I don't remember how much rehab time either of us had to adapt to our new lives. But it was clear that, even though I still had a long way to go, I was further down the road of understanding how acceptance fits into the concept of attitude change. My ABC tools: accept, believe, and care, and attitude's foundation, are each helpful by themselves. But sometimes they also need the help of one or both of the other two. I'm sharing what my rehab journey taught me about acceptance to help you, my fellow rehabber, to avoid making the early rehab mistakes I made. My most costly mistake was holding on to resentments. I resented acquiring a speech impairment, a paralyzed left side, a ruptured hypothalamus gland, leading to unstable emotions. And I resented needing to wear a frequently painful, heavy metal and plastic brace on my lower left leg, due to my coma-shortened hamstring. Having an attitude that is unwilling to accept these challenges turns them into problems, great big giant problems. Don't make the same mistake I did. My mistake was thinking that accepting a challenge means the same thing as resigning to it. It doesn't. Accepting a challenge gives us calm confidence as we put our resources up against our challenges. We rehabbers have a much easier time when we relax and go with the rehab flow. No matter how unpleasant our situation is, resenting our rehab circumstances only worsens them. Rehab and life in general are both easier when we accept responsibility, whenever we can. And when we do not blame ourselves or others, even if that is exactly what we want to do. After the understandably hot-headed girl leaves, a middle-aged man on crutches and with a missing right foot approaches the empty chair. His speech pattern is even worse than mine, in my opinion, but he's interesting. Anybody watching us would have wondered if we actually understood each other. Sure we did. Usually. Or at least sometimes. The one-footed man is patient, up to a point. By the time I get called in, another 90 minutes has passed, and he is continually glancing at his watch, and fidgeting. Like I imagine a one-footed pirate would fidget if his ship was slowly sinking. When the doctor comes into the examination room, I ask, "What took you so long to see me?" He looks at me and sighs patiently. Deep lines cut grooves in his forehead.
Sorry. The clinic is 2 doctors short today. And it's our receptionist's first week.
I don't say anything. Had we overreacted? Maybe, maybe not. It would have been easier to take if we knew the reason for the long wait. If we were important people, would we have been told why our wait was taking so long? Without a doubt. Is that racist, or did I make a realistic assumption? Were we not told because of our probable status as people with disabilities? Given the place we were, a clinic specifically for people with disabilities, I think it can be safely assumed that us having disabilities isn't why we weren't told. But, remember what they say about assuming. Besides acknowledging the truth that, to assume something can make an ass out of you and me, assuming can also be extremely dangerous for survivors of a stroke or any other type of trauma. If we assume we can do something we can't, we may end up killing ourselves. If we assume we cannot do something we can, we won't progress as we otherwise could, or we may die from boredom and lethargy. In other words, one of the best things for us rehabbers, or anyone else, to do, is to avoid making assumptions. That's a pretty obvious point to end with, but it's so true that I'll just leave it there.
This aspect of rehab and life, in general, is when they both start to get fascinatingly interesting. This is where we start discovering how to get a new perspective. A healthy perspective that strengthens us physically and emotionally, especially in our attitudes. Discovering a new perspective is like discovering a new continent that opens up your world. Hal sat in his recliner, shifting slightly to ease the pressure on his left side. Cheryl curled up beside him on the couch, holding a worn copy of Psychocybernetics in her hands. The book caught her attention during one of her many visits to the library while Hal was still in the hospital. Now, they were making it part of their routine. She flipped to a passage she had underlined earlier and began reading aloud.
Your nervous system cannot tell the difference between an imagined experience and a real experience. In either case, it reacts automatically to information given to it by your mind.
What? Is he saying that if I picture myself walking strong, standing balanced, my body will start acting like it's real?
Exactly. Morse explains that if we consistently imagine success, our minds start setting the course toward it. He calls it theater of the mind.
But what about when reality hits? I can picture it all day, but my left side still won't move right.
Cheryl flipped a few pages and found another section.
Listen to this. When we consciously and deliberately develop a new self-image, we are literally changing the wiring in our brains. The key is to persist with the mental image until it becomes second nature.
As you know, I've been into reading about the power of our minds for a long time.
I know. That's why I wondered why you never bring any of this stuff up. Here's something I found just today. Human beings always act and feel and perform following what they imagine to be true about themselves and their environment.
I like that you remembered that I'm into mind power focus techniques, and I totally appreciate that you even remembered how much I like Maxwell Maltz's work in psychocybernetics. The reason I haven't mentioned it regarding my being able to walk again is that there was actual physical damage done that is preventing me from walking as I did before my crash. I talked to the rehab psychologist, who told me that even though we can't see the damage done to my head without an X-ray, that's where the worst damage occurred, and that's why I'll never walk like I once did.
Hal noticed Cheryl's crestfallen expression, but he was so caught up in his all-consuming problems that if he even noticed she was showing signs of wear and tear, he wrongly assumed that it was concern over how he would deal with the issues he was facing. Hal wasn't being dense and egotistical on purpose. Ignorance and lack of concern for others, also called perspective, had him mistakenly thinking that his problems were problems for everyone in his sphere. The enormity of his disruptive new condition kept him from consciously realizing that if he was too much of a problem, people could just walk away. Cheryl was already stretched thin by getting a new job and making other changes to accommodate him. Of course, Hal knew this, but so much control had already been taken that it was sometimes easy to imagine that winds and random currents were overriding what little power he still had.
Based on my 45 years of experience, the most essential thing we rehabbers can have is goals. Having goals always keeps us at the top of our games. As soon as you reach a goal, set another one, a higher one. Remember that if you reach all your goals are too low. I'm still fairly new to this whole voice replacement thing, so I'm making noticeable mistakes. For example, the speaking character sharing the lessons learned is different from the first one I used, but don't let that bother you. The lessons I learned and am sharing are legit.
Welcome, fellow rehabber, to Chronicle 6A, where I begin my focus on the rehab foundation of believing in our own possibilities. Added to the accepting foundation, the believing foundation enables us to get more for our rehab efforts. I'm wearing a hospital robe and sitting in my wheelchair, waiting for my speech therapist. Right at 10 o'clock, my therapist and two women in casual business attire walk into my hospital room on the acute rehab floor at Evergreen Hospital.
Good morning, Al. How are you doing today? You're looking good.
My therapist Summer greeted as she and two women in casual business attire walked into the hospital room, where I lived during the second of exactly 3 months I spent in medical facilities after my stroke.
They're here to talk with you about going to Redmond Rehab. Bonnie set up a meeting for you two to talk with them later today. They are here now to speak with someone else who isn't quite ready. I thought it would be nice for them to meet you ahead of time.
Good morning, I confidently returned her greeting. Morning was one of the few words I could still pronounce. My stroke rewired nerves, especially in my face and throat, so air that ordinarily projected words out of my mouth ineffectively leaked out of my nose. As promised, the two women from Redmond Rehab visited a few minutes, and were off to visit whoever they had intended. Up until now, I have laid out different ways acceptance minimizes the emotional damage we feel as a result of the physical damage we survived. Having it confirmed that I would be continuing my rehab journey in close-to-home Redmond Rehab raised my spirits. It didn't really matter, I suppose. I just felt better knowing I was in the hood. The first two foundations, accepting and believing, are defensive tools. They are the nuts and bolts of hope. Once acceptance and believing stabilize us, building hope now's third and final foundation. Caring about others ushers us into the kingdom of even more rehab progress and confident rehab hope. The 5 sections on accepting things we cannot change, at the beginning of these chronicles, introduces building hope now's first foundation, acceptance, and gives us a goal to aim for. The goal is a felt sense of calm confidence. It's difficult to describe how confident the tool of acceptance makes us rehabbers feel. Just like hearing coffee described doesn't give someone the same experience they have when the aroma of morning coffee promises and then delivers a wide-awake feeling that enables coffee drinkers to seize the day's opportunities. Setting rehab goals is a product of believing in our own possibilities. Have you set goals that stretch you to do more than you thought you could? If you have, good for you. Congratulations. If you haven't, why not? Let's get on it. Working toward rehab goals is the key to making rehab progress. Rehabbers, especially us brain-injured ones, can have flashes of negative emotions like fear, anger, resentment, self-doubt, self-pity, and others. Successful rehabbers kick those thoughts out ASAP. We don't dwell on negative thoughts. Successful rehabbers know that working toward goals builds our confidence and our hope. My two favorite things about goals are: Number 1. Working toward goals fights our fears by focusing our hopes on making rehab progress. Number 2. Working toward rehab goals gives us confidence, whether we reach a particular goal or not. Working toward goals is all about building a stronger belief in our own possibilities. Real goals stretch us. If we reach all our goals are too low. Challenge yourself. Experience taught me that the more I believe in my possibilities, the higher my goals. And the more likely I am to reach them.
As you know, either from your own experience or from hearing my experience, recovery is rarely a straight path. It's full of setbacks, triumphs, and moments that test the limits of endurance. I am sharing the following two stories because they are potent reminders of what's possible when guided determination meets the proper support. The first story follows a survivor who refused to let life-altering injuries define her future. Through sheer perseverance, she regained independence and found a new purpose in helping others navigate their recoveries. The second story highlights the journey of someone who faced seemingly insurmountable odds but discovered strength in small victories. With patience, hard work, and an unwavering belief in progress, she rebuilt her life step by step. Both of these stories, like my own story, reflect the resilience of the human spirit. They prove that with hope and persistence, transformation is always within reach.
The Central Park jogger, Trisha Meili, is a prime example of how one can cope with the trauma of a horrific event. In an interview with Oprah Winfrey, Meili spoke candidly about how she handled the aftermath of the attack, which she suffered in April 1989. Meili told Oprah that the healing process was complex but began with her faith in God. She believed her faith helped her find the courage to face the trauma and the strength to carry on. Meili also recognized the importance of balancing her emotional and physical needs. She learned to practice mindfulness and meditation to remain present in the moment and tap into her inner strength. She also used visualization techniques to remain focused and in a positive frame of mind. Meili also spoke to Oprah about how therapy helped her cope with her trauma. She made sure to find a therapist whom she could trust and who could provide her with the specialized support that she needed. She was honest and open with her therapist and willing to explore her thoughts and emotions. This honest and open dialogue helped her to process her emotions, identify her triggers, and develop coping skills. Meili also recognized the importance of community and its role in the healing process. In the years following the attack, she found solace in the support of her family, friends, and even strangers who showed her kindness and compassion. Finally, Meili also made sure to take care of herself. She acknowledged the importance of self-care, which included listening to her body and respecting her boundaries. She also learned how to find joy in the little things and appreciate the beauty of life. Overall, Trisha Meili's story is one of hope and resilience. She has shown that healing and finding peace in trauma is possible.
A second story I found very helpful and inspiring involves another story you may have heard about. It was also in the newspaper.
The Boston bombings of April 15, 2013, were a tragic and life-changing event for many of the survivors and their families. One of these survivors is Heather Abbott, who lost her left foot from the blasts. Abbott's story of recovery and resilience is inspiring, and her explanation of how she dealt with her trauma was shared with Oprah Winfrey in 2016. Abbott's traumatic journey began with the initial shock and horror of the incident. She was a spectator who had impulsively decided to attend the Boston Marathon for one of her friends. She was injured when the second bomb detonated, a moment that would change her life. In the immediate aftermath, Abbott was determined to make the most of her situation and to come out stronger than before. She did not want to be defined by her tragedy and immediately set out to build a new life for herself. Abbott began by developing a positive attitude and mindset. She focused on the good and appreciated that she was still alive. She also placed a strong emphasis on maintaining her independence and vowed not to let her disability affect her life. Additionally, Abbott took strength from the support of her family and friends, who helped her stay positive and motivated. Throughout her recovery, Abbott embraced many challenges, including the intense physical rehabilitation required to help her learn to walk again. She has also learned to cope with the emotional side of her ordeal and has been open about discussing her feelings and experiences.
Today, Abbott is an inspirational role model who reminds us that no matter how complex and challenging life becomes, we can all find the strength to persevere and come out on top. If these two trauma survivors can push forward with good attitudes and without self-pity, so can I. And so can you. Going through rehab twice and applying my accepting, believing, and caring strategies the second time brought some of the most challenging, discouraging, and victorious moments of my life. In those times, I learned to lean on the God of my upbringing. Mom and Dad exemplified God's strength and peace. His gifts, whether endurance, hope, or moments of clarity, came in proportion to my need and trust in Him. I didn't speak about my relationship with God initially because this is an introduction to my longer piece about goals and rehab hope. I am mentioning God now because God's part of my experience, and talking about my goal-setting rehab experiences without mentioning God's vital role would give you an incomplete picture. The more I relied on using the tools of accepting the life book I've been given, believing I can write a happy ending, and caring about others, the clearer it became that God's hand was guiding the process. If you are open to it, you may find the same to be true in your journey. Trusting in God doesn't make the rehab road easy, but it does mean you're never walking it alone. Whether your goals involve rehab or something more common, the same principles of patience and a winner's don't quit attitude apply. Having goals is about focusing on continuous growth, resilience, and a positive mindset. Embrace patience, self-compassion, and curiosity. Celebrate incremental progress. Learn from setbacks. Maintaining optimism and realistic expectations is key to turning challenges into opportunities and cultivating sustainable, long-term motivation. Consistent effort transforms dreams into reality.